Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Imagine cracking open like a collection of private notes, character sketches, dramatic scenes, all from this sprawling, really complex story.
Right.
That's kind of the vibe from the stack of sources we're diving into today. We've got these fragments that taint these incredibly vivid portraits of fascinating, often troubled people.
And they throw you right into these moments of, intense personal conflict and some pretty sharp social observations, too.
Totally. It's less like a straight narrative and more like stepping into the middle of several interconnected storms, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. The sources give us these super specific details, these key interactions, and they unlock so much about the characters and the world they're living in.
Absolutely. So our mission in this deep dive, it's not just summarizing the plot, right?
No, not at all.
We're here to pull out the real gold, the crucial insights, the surprising human truths that get revealed in these pages. It's like a shortcut to understanding the core of this complex world.
Exactly. Get ready to connect some dots because, yeah, these sources are dense. They're packed with meaning.
The real power is seeing what these events, these interactions, what they reveal. So where does our journey begin? It's right at the point of arrival, isn't it? The sources introduce Prince Muishkin arriving in Petersburg.
Yes.
What's his state like? His appearance when he first shows up?
Well, he's definitely not arriving in style. He's described as dressed poorly, just carrying this bundle.
Okay.
The sources are pretty blunt, actually. They note his circumstances are not particularly racy at this moment. It's a very humble entrance. Almost vulnerable, you could say.
And that vulnerability immediately kind of sets him apart, right? Like a first chat with the servant at the Epanchin place.
Oh, yeah, that's really telling. You see this immediate clash,
Yeah.
between how the prince is and the established social rules.
The servant's reaction.
He's thrown off, yeah. Even uncomfortable because the prince just talks to him, directly. Artless and confiding, the source says.
No sense of ranking.
Exactly. And that's just not done. Talking to a servant like an equal, the source calls it highly improper. It flags him straight away as, well, different. Outside the norm.
Right. He's not playing by the rules, even the simple ones. Yet, despite looking like, well, a beggar almost, he seems confident it'll be received. Why is that?
He mentions his connection. It's through Madame Epanchin. Apparently, she really values her Muishkin lineage.
Ah, yeah.
So it seems this old family name, this link to nobility, that's the currency that gets him in the door, even when he looks like he does.
Lineage trumps circumstance.
Pretty much, yeah. In this case, anyway.
Fascinating. And while he's waiting, he runs into Gavrila Ardalyanovich, Ganya. How did the sources describe him?
Anya is presented as handsome, 28, fair, middle height, small beard, and an intelligent face. He's the general secretary.
Okay.
And he's immediately curious about this unexpected arrival. You get the sense he's someone trying to make his way, aware of appearances, position, that sort of thing.
Interesting. And it's interesting, too, that the prince, this seemingly simple, almost naive guy, immediately shares something incredibly profound.
Yeah.
And disturbing, really. First with the servant, then with Ganya. What's that story?
It's a really striking account of witnessing an execution. The prince describes, in visceral detail, the condemned man's state of mind. Those final minutes.
Wow.
The heightened consciousness, the brain racing, noticing tiny irrelevant details like a wart on someone's face or a rusty button on the executioner's uniform.
That's incredibly specific.
It is. And he talks about how the man had a specific time for farewells, then just a few moments for reflection, right there on the scaffold before the end.
Just imagining that.
It's this incredible insight into the human mind under, the ultimate pressure. And the fact that he tells his story so readily, first to a servant, it just highlights his strange openness and maybe his past closeness to suffering or these really profound experiences.
That detail, the rusty button, the ward, it's so real.
Yeah.
It tells you something about the sheer intensity of that last moment. And speaking of unique details, the sources also mention the prince has this unexpected skill.
Ah, yes, his calligraphy. He shows a sample written in this sort of medieval style. It reads, "The gentle Abbot Pafnute signed this."
Okay.
And General Epanchin sees it and is genuinely impressed. He calls it real talent.
So another contradiction.
Exactly. It's another little piece that just doesn't fit that initial wretched idiot impression some people might have formed. He arrives in rags, talks openly about death, and then he has this obscure artistic talent. It's quite a mix.
So right from the start, you see this blend. Vulnerability, strange honesty, profound experience, and this unexpected depth. Now, our sources pretty quickly introduce a name that seems to cast a huge shadow, Nastasia Philipovna.
Yes.
How does her name first come up, and what kind of reaction does it get?
Her name appears early on, linked to some guy named Likhachov, and the reaction is immediate and intense. Particularly from Rogojin, he's mentioned as turning pale just hearing her name in that context.
So you know instantly she's central.
Oh, yeah. Central to some serious drama, no question.
And we learn about her history, especially her relationship with Totsky.
Huh?
There's a specific incident with diamonds that feels pretty crucial.
Yes, that diamond incident really defines her defiance, her power over Totsky. He gives her diamonds and she returns them with obvious contempt. And she pointedly thanks Rogojin in the process, implying he helped her somehow. And the sources make it crystal clear. Totsky is terrified of her. He funked once, it says, and never got his ease back. He remained simply afraid.
Wow. So she has real psychological power over him.
Absolutely. Which makes his next move interesting. He tries to maybe resolve this fear, this complication. Yeah. He takes steps to establish her in Petersburg. What does that look like?
He sets her up very luxuriously, and because of this, her beauty became widely known. But despite her, let's say, ambiguous social status.
Right. She's not a wife, not really a mistress in the way people understood it then.
She gains this reputation for wit, culture, grace. She becomes this figure in society, but one surrounded by whispers, you know.
Definitely. And this situation leads Totsky to approach General Epanchin for advice. He's thinking about marrying one of the general's daughters, maybe hoping to finally put his past with Nastasia behind him.
Okay, trying to clean the slate.
Exactly. And in that conversation, a huge sum of money comes up, 75,000 rubles, tied somehow to Nastasia Philipovna.
Wow.
And her reaction when she hears about this money and Totsky's proposal, it's described as astonishingly changed. He seems to agree, says she'll give her final decision on her birthday evening.
That sudden shift is odd.
It is. Is it relief? Calculation? Something else entirely. The sources just show you the stark contrast in how she reacts. It's puzzling.
And adding another layer of complexity, there's a rumor going around about the respectable General Epanchin himself.
Yes, the rumor is that the general isn't immune to Nastasia Philipovna's pull. His fascination with her apparently amounts almost to passion.
So you've got Totsky afraid of her, Rogojin intensely fixated, and now even the seemingly solid general possibly compromised by his feelings.
She clearly disrupts the composure of these powerful men around her. It's a picture of a woman who, despite her difficult past, her unclear status, wields this immense influence.
This entanglement brings us right into the heart of the Epanchin household. What are the key dynamics there? Starting with the matriarch, Mrs. General Epanchin.
Lisabetha Prokofievna. She's described as proud, strong-willed. Her initial reaction to the prince showing up, especially hearing him called a beggar and maybe an idiot, is very negative, judgmental.
Okay.
Physically, she's noted for a slightly hooked nose, high forehead, gray eyes she thinks are effective. The sources show her having these moments of intense emotion, difficulty managing her reactions, especially towards the prince.
And her daughters, Adelaida and Aglaya.
We meet them, and interestingly, despite their mother's initial skepticism about the prince, they're actually captivated by his execution story.
Huh?
Yeah, it suggests maybe a certain depth, or perhaps a kind of morbid curiosity that goes beyond typical aristocratic concerns.
The sources also give us a peek into Ganya's home life, which sounds quite complex.
It certainly paints a picture of constrained circumstances. Ganya lives at Titsyn's house with his mother, Nina Alexandrovna, and his younger brother, Kolya. It's lodgings for highly recommended people, apparently.
Right.
But his father, General Rogojin, lives separately, in this small room near the kitchen, sharing with Kolya. Even though he's nominally the master of the house, it's a portrait of a family keeping up appearances under strain.
And the prince gets pulled deeper into their world through an object connected to Nastasia Philipovna.
Yes, her portrait. Nastasia gives it to Ganya. He shows it to the general. Mrs. Epanchin hews about it, demands to see it.
Oh, okay.
So the prince gets sent to fetch it from the study, and significantly, he promises Ganya he won't show it to anyone else or read any letter that might be with it. This task puts him right in the middle of the household's fascination, maybe obsession, with Nastasia.
That portrait feels like a focal point for all the tension, the obsessions in that house. This all sets the stage perfectly for the gatherings and confrontations the sources detail. First, that tense scene at Ganya's place, waiting for Nastasia's birthday decision.
Ganya is portrayed as deeply agitated. He doesn't love Nastasia, not really. But he's fixated on this potential marriage because he sees it as his chance to start with capital. money.
Right.
He's suspicious she loves him in her own way, which he seems to think means she wants to control him. He's also preoccupied with this idea of originality, thinks it's highly valued.
Comes across as a pretty unpleasant character, actually.
Yeah. And another less than charming figure turns up there too, Fedoshenko.
Oh, right.
He's described through his desire to be original, which the sources say rarely comes off, leaves a bad impression. He's noted as being dirty, old coat, smells of vodka, and he composes this really awkward game where everyone confesses their worst action.
Classy. And the sources don't shy away from the absurd either. General Rogojin contributes his share with those bizarre anecdotes.
Like the story of being slapped by a lady on a train because he had a poodle, it just adds this layer of almost pathetic delusion to the whole scene, contrasting with Ganya's calculating tension.
And into this strange mix walks Nastasia Philipovna herself.
Yeah.
Unexpectedly, before her own party.
Her arrival is described as merry, but she exchanges these weird, knowing looks with Varya, Ganya's sister. Her reaction to seeing the prince is pretty remarkable. She's struck dumb.
Really?
Yeah. She asks him why he looks so surprised, where he's seen her before, and the prince's simple explanation that her portrait struck him, it seems to have this profound effect on her.
That moment feels significant.
Yeah.
His simple, honest reaction to just her image impacts her so deeply. It leads us straight to the main event, the climactic birthday party at Nastasia's house.
The stage is set. Ganya's there, looking gloomy, miserable. The general pops in, trying to show interest. It's a room just buzzing with expectation and all this underlying tension.
And then the tension just explodes. Rogojin arrives.
Dramatically. He bursts in, clearly agitated, described as being in a delirious condition, and his focus is intense, almost solely on the prince.
And he makes that shocking, defining offer.
He offers 100,000 rubles for Nastasia Philipovna. It's just this open, brutal commodification of a person.
That was believable.
And an actress in the room actually encourages Nastasia, cynically, to take the money and get rid of Rogojin. Just reinforces the whole transactional vibe of the situation.
And this is the moment the prince steps in, isn't it?
Yeah.
How does he intervene?
He speaks with trembling accents, the source says, but his words are firm. He defends Nastasia, states unequivocally she is not Rogojin's mistress.
Okay.
Then he declares his love for her, but crucially, he describes it as love mixed with pity. He offers to work for her, die for her. It's a declaration completely unlike anything else happening in that room.
And the reaction.
Mostly mocking reactions, suppressed smiles. Nobody really gets it.
His declaration of pity as part of his love, that's so central to his character and the tragedy unfolding, isn't it? It's not conventional passion.
Not at all. And Nastasia's response to the whole scene, it's utterly defiant.
The money.
She performs this shocking act. She throws the 75,000 rubles from Trotsky straight into the fireplace.
Wow.
And she challenges Ganya to get it. There is your happiness, Ganya. Catch it. The reactions from the guests are visceral, gasping, crossing themselves, calling her mad. Lebedev's reaction is particularly memorable. He actually crawls towards the fire, desperately pleading, mentioning his lame wife, 13 starving children, hoping to salvage the money. It's just this moment of extreme drama, a total rejection of both the money and the conventional path Ganya represented.
That act is a total rejection of all the financial stuff, the expectations surrounding her. It really shifts the ground for everyone there.
Yeah.
Which brings us into a new phase, right? Relationships are fracturing, new conflicts are bubbling up. What happens to the prince right after this night?
The intensity, it takes a toll. He suffers an illness described as a relapse of his condition, specifically attributed to idiocy. He goes back to Switzerland for treatment. And the sources note something interesting. During his fits, he experiences these moments of extreme consciousness. But paradoxically, he sees them not as clarity, but as a lower, abnormal state caused by the disease itself.
That's fascinating. How does the Epanchin family react to his sudden departure, the news of his condition?
Initially, they're bewildered, upset. Later, Mrs. Epanchin gets some positive news about him from a Princess Bielokonsky, which comforts her a bit.
And the general?
Ever practical, he takes an interest in the business side of the prince's affairs. Mentions someone named Selaskin. But then the prince disappears again for a while, and silence about him just falls over the Epanchin house.
While he's gone, or maybe just returned, a new character emerges. Someone with a very different kind of struggle. Hippolyte Terentiev.
Ah, Hippolyte. He's a young man consumed by illness consumption. He knows he's dying soon. And his character is defined by this desire to face death on his own terms. To die eloquently, as the source puts it. He engages with the prince, writes a critical article, makes these bizarre claims, like the prince sits silently in his room at night, tormenting him.
Strange.
He reflects on how facing death has changed him, yet insists he'd still react instinctively to pain. He questions the whole idea of conquering nature. And he has this disturbing dream or hallucination of a reptile. It seems to embody his struggle with base instinct and fear.
He represents a different kind of suffering, a different intellectual turmoil than the prince, but they seem drawn to each other somehow. Another conflict that pops up involves a claim on the prince's money.
Yes, the Burdovsky claim. This man, Burdovsky, is presented as the son of Pavlichev, the prince's late benefactor.
Okay.
He shows up with a lawyer, Chebarov, and a group of supporters, including Lebedev's nephew and Keller the boxer. They claim he's entitled to money from the prince as Pavlichev's son, and there's a newspaper article supporting their claim, adding public pressure.
How does the prince handle this accusation and demand?
Well, he's deeply distressed by it. Initially, quite impulsively, he calls it a fraud orchestrated by the lawyer, Chebarov, which understandably really upsets Burdovsky and his crew.
Right.
He quickly apologizes, admits he was wrong to call it a fraud, and wrong to suggest Burdovsky was afflicted, like me. He acknowledges Burdovsky teaches lessons, supports his mother, tries to fix his harsh words, but the whole incident creates this significant awkwardness and tension.
And Ganya points out something else.
Yeah, Ganya points out a discrepancy. The prince apparently only gave Burdovsky 100 rubles, but the article claimed 250. It just adds another layer of confusion and maybe manipulation by someone.
It really highlights how the prince's lack of maybe conventional social cunning makes him vulnerable to these schemes, even while his fundamental decency is struggling to deal with it all. Meanwhile, back in Ganya's world, his father, the general, is involved in a weird incident with a missing purse.
Oh, right. Another moment of absurdity mixed with tension. The general appeals to the prince about his missing purse. Lebedev gets involved in this peculiar way, dropping hints about where it might be, maybe even buried somewhere.
Buried, okay.
Ultimately, Lebedev finds the purse and insists the prince hold on to it, which just makes the general furious at Lebedev's interference.
And the general keeps adding to the narrative with his increasingly fantastical stories.
Yes. He tells this completely implausible story about being Napoleon's page boy back at the Kremlin. Claims he witnessed Davoust talking about salt horse flesh and glimpsed Napoleon's secret sorrow.
Wow. And the prince's reaction?
It's hesitant. He just asks if it really was so. Whereas Kalia, Ganya's young brother, reacts with this really touching emotional belief in his father's story.
These various interactions just show the swirling chaos, the difficult characters the prince is surrounded by. But maybe the most complex dynamic after Nastasia develops with Aglaya.
Yes, Aglaya.
How does that relationship start to take shape?
Aglaya, remember, she's one of the Epanchin daughters who was interested in his execution story. She becomes increasingly central. Initially, Varya, Ganya's sister, kind of exaggerates the idea of the prince being engaged to Aglaya, partly to annoy Ganya, but she also seems to genuinely believe Aglaya is 1,000 times nobler than her own family.
And Mrs. Epanchin has her own mix of pride and anxiety about Aglaya, doesn't she?
Oh, definitely. She sees Aglaya's potential, but she also fears her independence. Describes her as potentially a tyrant, a little demon, a nihilist, or just senseless.
Quite the range.
Yeah. And this fear contrasts with Aglaya's obvious beauty and the rumors of a potential engagement that could, secure her future.
There's that moment with a hedgehog that feels like vintage Aglaya. Mischievous and probing.
Right. She sends the prince a hedgehog. Later, she confronts him directly, asks his opinion of it. And the prince is described as visibly flustered, just stammering, trying to respond. It's this small, strange interaction, but it reveals Aglaya's playful but also challenging nature and the prince's awkwardness in these conventional social games.
The relationship moves past games, though. Aglaya asks him a very direct question about their future.
She does. She asks him straight out if he will ask for her hand in marriage. And his response is just a simple, affirmative, yes, I do ask for it.
Which surprises people.
Yeah, even her father, the general. He questions if the prince can really make her happy, and maybe more importantly, if she is truly serious about it. It feels like Aglaya is driving the pace here, testing his sincerity or maybe just his willingness.
But even though she seems to be pursuing him, she also criticizes him quite sharply.
Yes, she confronts him about his perceived lack of education. It just adds to the contradictory nature of her feelings, her actions towards him.
Her contradictory behavior is maybe best shown by that incident with the note followed immediately by her mother's actions.
Oh, right. Aglaya sends the prince a note forbidding him from visiting. Says she has no desire to see him. And then literally right after, Mrs. Epanchin physically grabs the prince by the hand, leads him to the door, insisting he come into the house.
Incredible.
It highlights Aglaya's conflicting impulses, maybe, and her mother's exasperation, or perhaps her own hidden agenda. Who knows?
At one point, Aglaya seems to use a public performance to make a veiled, pointed comment, likely about Nastasia.
The Poor Night Ballad. She recites it, but she intentionally changes key initials to NPB. The sources note this was premeditated, a joke, strongly implying it was aimed at Nastasia Philipovna, linking her to this figure of intense, almost worshipful devotion.
And her contradictions really peak in the Epanchin gathering.
Yeah. Publicly, she completely denies any engagement or strong connection to the prince, says he's just as little to me as all the rest. Total dismissal.
But then,
Moments later, privately, she gives him the most intense praise, calls him better, nobler, kinder, wiser than all the men she knows. It's a stunning display of conflicting emotions, social performance versus genuine feeling. What do you make of that?
it's one of those moments that just makes you question everything about her motivations. Is she genuinely conflicted? Is she testing him? Playing some larger game? Or does she simply not understand her own feelings? Because that praise is incredibly high.
But her public actions are designed to push him away. It's baffling.
That tension explodes in the dramatic confrontation between Aglaya and Nastasia Philipovna.
Aglaya initiates this meeting, and she's clearly agitated, pale, trembling. She launches this harsh attack on Nastasia, accuses her of taking advantage of her situation, criticizes her past choices, specifically for not seeking honest work, even suggests she should have become a laundress.
Wow, that's brutal. And class-tinged.
Absolutely. The prince tries to intervene, calls Aglaya's words unfair. Rogojin is there too, silently observing the whole intense scene. Aglaya eventually leaves in distress, heads for Varia's house after this clash.
That meeting really crystallizes the central conflict between these two women, doesn't it? Vying for the prince's affection in such different ways. It also seems to trigger the final tragic spiral. Before we get right to the climax, we hear about Rogojin's actions in the background. What's he up to?
Rogojin is active financially. He's buying up someone named Kupferov's IOUs. Evgeny Pavlovich overhears this and is both confused and angry about Rogojin's dealings. It just shows Rogojin isn't only focused on the personal drama, he's also operating in the more conventional world of money and transactions.
And Evgeny Pavlovich also visits the prince after that big confrontation between Aglaya and Nastasia. What's the state of things then?
Evgeny notes the fallout is severe. The Epanchins and their whole circle have broken ties with the prince.
Okay.
He discusses the recent events, expresses sorrow, and he tries to analyze the prince's relationship with Nastasia. Suggests it started and ended with a lie, perhaps referring to the prince's declared pity.
That's a significant observation about the lie of pity.
It is. It questions the authenticity, maybe the completeness of his emotions. Yet crucially, Evgeny insists the prince is too intelligent to be simply dismissed as an idiot.
Right. And the sources also include this striking third-party perspective on the prince's choices regarding Nastasia.
Yeah, Lebedev recounts a doctor's view, which suggests that the prince's decision about Nastasia, considering her beauty and the wealth she commanded from Totsky and Rogojin, could actually be seen not as foolishness, but as surprisingly shrewd and practical.
A cynical take.
Very cynical. Lebedev himself is struck by this worldly interpretation. It forces you, the reader, to consider if there's some level of calculation beneath the prince's apparent simplicity. Or are others just projecting their own values onto him?
As the planned wedding between the prince and Nastasia gets closer, the sources paint a picture of Nastasia's state of mind. What's happening with her?
She becomes increasingly agitated, consumed by fear. Days before the wedding, she's terrified, believes Rogojin is going to murder her, even claims she sees him hiding places.
Wow.
The sources describe her condition as approaching to absolute madness. This deep fear, this mental unraveling, it completely overshadows the wedding preparations.
The wedding day arrives, preparations are underway.
Yes, everything's ready. They're literally on their way to the church. Nastasia's appearance right before, at Daria Alexeyevna's house, is described with stark intensity. Her face is white, but her eyes are blazing like fire. It's such a vivid image of her internal turmoil.
And then, at the very last moment, she makes her final, tragic choice.
Instead of getting into the carriage with Keller to go to the church, she suddenly breaks away, rushes into the crowd gathered outside, goes straight towards Rogojin, and leaves with him.
Just like that.
Just like that. A sudden, decisive, devastating reversal of everything.
What's the prince's immediate state after this catastrophe?
He returns home. The wedding party is now just this group of bewildered guests, and he addresses them courteously, seemingly maintaining his composure despite it all.
But he doesn't just stay there, does he? He goes looking for her.
He does. He goes to her lodging in town. There's this moment where he briefly sees Rogojin's face at a blind, and it causes him uncertainty, delay. He hesitates, perhaps sensing something terrible has happened.
His search ultimately leads him to Rogojin's house.
Rogojin is waiting for him there. He's agitated, visibly shaken. He talks about Nastasia's delirium, his own conflicting feelings.
And then comes that chilling scene inside the house.
Rogojin leads the prince through the house to a specific room, and across part of the room there's this heavy green silk curtain stretched.
What does Rogojin tell him?
He reveals Nastasia is behind the curtain, suggests she's merely asleep. Then he says to the prince, "Take her. It's fate. She's yours. I surrender her. Remember, Rogojin." And he pushes the prince forward towards the curtain before quickly retreating into his own flat and slamming the door.
The implication.
Yeah.
It's devastatingly clear. The sources describe a later moment between the two of them after the discovery.
The prince is described as trembling violently. He asks Rogojin if he did it, motioning with his head towards where Nastasia's body lies behind the curtain. It's just this quiet, horrifying confirmation.
What becomes of Rogojin in the end?
Rogojin suffers from brain fever for 2 months after. He's eventually tried for murder, convicted, sent to Siberia.
Okay.
And the sources note that his evidence is given in such a way that it keeps the prince's name out of the legal proceedings. Perhaps a final, strange act of protection, respect. It's hard to say.
Now the prince's fate?
The sources tell us Kolya, the young boy from Ganya's household, chooses Evgeny Pavlovich as his confidant, tells him what happened at the end. And the prince, unable to cope with the trauma, returns to the Swiss clinic for more treatment. His state described as his further fate, bringing him right back to where he started, his condition perhaps worsened irrevocably.
It's a deeply tragic arc, isn't it? A character defined by his compassion, seemingly unable to prevent the ultimate catastrophe swirling around him.
Absolutely.
This has been a deep dive into some truly intense and complex source material. As we kind of step back, what are some of the key insights, the themes that were woven through all these events?
Well, one idea that really stands out, something the prince himself struggles with and talks about with Keller, is this concept of double motives. Right. He sees it as incredibly difficult to fight against, where seemingly base or contradictory ideas can just arise from unknown, maybe subconscious sources. It suggests the human mind is far from simple, Yes. Not unified in its desires.
And Hippolyte, facing his own death, brings up another profound conflict.
His struggle really embodies that tension between the will to die on one's own terms, to die eloquently, and the basic, almost animalistic instinct to live, to react to pain. His chilling thought that even with only 2 weeks left, he'd still scream on the rack, or his hallucination of the reptile. They highlight this fundamental, maybe unconquerable part of human nature.
And even flawed characters like Lebedev offer these moments of unexpected, if maybe rambling, philosophical insight.
Yeah, despite his comical or manipulative moments, Lebedev touches on bigger ideas about the devil, history, human nature. He sees these powerful opposing forces at play, like self-preservation versus self-destruction, as equally potent in shaping events. It adds this layer of existential thinking, even when it's delivered imperfectly.
The sources also made us think about the nature of portraying people in stories, didn't they?
Yeah, that discussion about the difficulty of depicting commonplace people versus these extraordinary types, and which feels more real. It raises questions about where truth in storytelling really lies, in the average or the extreme.
The prince's own mind, even when agitated, offered glimpses of this unique intellect.
His passionate, unconventional thoughts on Russia, its class structure, his strong views on Roman Catholicism, they're examples of his active, original mind at work, even while he's struggling with his condition. They show he's thinking deeply about the world, not just passively observing it.
And Aglaya's contrasting actions towards him, they remain such a puzzle.
That intense private praise, better, nobler, kinder, wiser than all, set against her harsh public denials and criticisms. It forces you to consider the complexity of her character, maybe the societal pressures she was under, or just her own inability to reconcile her feelings.
Finally, that phrase, "weakness is a great power," is attributed to the prince.
When you look at the intense passions, the conflicts, the tragic outcomes described in these sources, that idea feels particularly poignant, even tragically ironic, maybe.
Right.
Does meekness possess great power in this world? Or is the prince's tragedy, in part, a demonstration of its vulnerability when it's confronted with such overwhelming force and passion? It's a tough question.
What a journey through these pages. We've encountered characters driven by obsession, fear, pride, profound confusion. We've witnessed moments of unexpected kindness, shocking cruelty, philosophical depth, and just tragic human contradiction.
Yeah.
From a prince arriving in poverty to a fortune thrown into flames, from passionate declarations to fatal decisions, these sources give us so much to consider. We've pulled out the key insights, the surprising details, the complex dynamics that make this story so compelling.
The way these characters interact, the way their internal lives are revealed, even in their contradictions, it feels incredibly vivid and human.
So what does all this mean for you listening? As you reflect on this deep dive, maybe think about that central idea of perception versus reality that ran through so many of these interactions. How often did what people thought was happening or what they expected from others completely clash with the complex, often hidden realities of emotion, motive, and mental state?
Yeah, the gap is huge sometimes.
It really makes you wonder how much of the world we perceive is truly accurate, doesn't it? Keep exploring that idea.